And now, the star of the show, Jordan Rogozinski.
Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Jordan 411 Sports Show. Today is my first live show, and what a special guest I have. He's been with TSN since 1998. Please welcome James Duthie.
How you doing, Jordan?
I'm doing good. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me on your show. First live show. I feel like a very honored guest.
Yeah. How did you get into the business of broadcasting?
Oh, that's a long story, Jordan. I don't want to fill up your whole show with one answer. I think I was like a lot of people. I loved sports when I was a kid. I loved playing sports, and wasn't a good enough athlete. And so I thought if I wasn't a good enough athlete, maybe I could be a broadcaster. And I took journalism at Carleton University and ended up being a news reporter for a bunch of years because there just weren't any jobs in sports back then, kind of the days before TSN and everything else. And so I was a news reporter who covered fires and murders and all those things you see on the 6 o'clock news, and finally got a chance to do sports after a few years locally in Ottawa, and spent a little time in Vancouver, and then was lucky enough to get the call from TSN.
That's a good story. What's the best news story you covered? The best, like murder, fire.
I don't know. The murders aren't very fun. That was the one thing I say about news, Jordan. There's a lot of negative, and those parts I didn't like. I didn't like covering the negative stories. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a quick story. I was a football player in high school, and there was a story in Ottawa where I think it was 3 high school football players died. They were driving home from Montreal. The car went off the road. And I remember having to go to the house of one of the players to ask for a photo, which is typical of news, and had to knock on the door and have his mother answer the door. And I remember walking away going, boy, I don't want to do this anymore. She was, obviously so heartbroken. And I wanted to surround myself with more positive things, which I think sports is in general. As far as my favorite story, geez, that's a tough one. I got to do a lot of fun, like features and interviews with people. I got to interview a lot of bands, and the coolest thing I think I got to do, I got to do sort of danger stories. Like I jumped out of a plane, and I did fire walking, and I did bungee jumping back when bungee jumping was just started. That's how old I am. Like bungee jumping had just sort of come to North America, and so I did a bunch of those sort of, whatever you want to call it, daredevil stories. And those are probably my favorites.
Cool. Now you cover the World Junior Championship. What's your experiences covering those?
Probably, I always have a debate with myself between the World Juniors and the Masters, which are my two. Those are my 2 favorite events every year, the Masters golf tournament. But I love the World Juniors. I've been doing it for, I guess, 16, 17 years now. And when it's in Canada, Canada versus USA or Russia, New Year's Eve, the crowds are so amazing. One of my favorites was Ottawa, just because that was back in my hometown and the crowd was so great there. Here's a funny story. My parents came to the game and they sat in the booth with me. And that was the semifinal game against Russia in 2009. And there was bad traffic always to get to the rink in Ottawa. So with about 3 minutes left, Russia was ahead by a goal. And I said, you guys should better get going to beat the traffic. And so they left. And that's when Jordan Eberle scored that goal. It's so famous. So I think my mom and dad were forever mad at me for getting them to leave and missing the Eberle goal.
Oh, that kind of sucks.
Yeah,
They missed history.
They forgave me eventually.
Yeah. You also covered the Olympic Games. Can you describe the atmosphere and what the whole event's like in general?
Yeah, well, I've done a few of them, but obviously my favorite would be Vancouver, just because doing an Olympic Games in Canada is amazing. And that atmosphere was probably the favorite single event of my career, just because every night the streets of Vancouver were just full of people from all over the world, but mostly Canadians. It was just such a time of pride in our country. It was like this 16-day incredible party. The funny thing about covering the Olympics, and I think any broadcaster would tell you this, you're exhausted because it's super long hours and you don't get much sleep, and you're counting down the days for it to be over the entire time because it's so much work. But then as soon as it's over, you don't want it to be over because it was such a neat experience. And the atmosphere, in that arena when the gold medal hockey game, when Crosby scored the goal, I don't know that I'll ever feel anything like that again in my career. So I'm a big Olympics guy. Obviously, Japan's going to be very different this year with no fans, and I'm not covering it this year. But there are a few things in the world like in Olympic Games. It's really, really neat.
Now we're gonna talk about your charity work a little bit with the Children's Believe charity,
Right.
and you recently went to what's it called?
Ethiopia. It's okay.
Ethiopia. Can you describe your experience in Ethiopia, please?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to do something many years ago. I wanted to get involved in something rather deeply, and Children Believe came to me. And I also selfishly, I wanted to show my kids, how lucky they are to live in Canada and how different the rest of the world is. And so one of the things I did was take each of my kids on one trip to different countries. My son went to Paraguay, and my daughter, we sponsored a child, and my daughter went to Nicaragua, and then my last daughter went to Ethiopia with me. So that was the last trip. We all took them when the kids were in grade 10. And I think I don't want to say life-changing, that's a big word, but I think it's an experience that will change you, and certainly change my daughter, because you grow up in Canada not really wanting for anything, and then you go to Ethiopia where the level of poverty in some places is just something it's hard to wrap your head around unless you see it. And we sponsor a little girl there, and to be able to see her and meet her and see her family and see how, the money that we give in sponsorship helps them a little bit was incredibly gratifying. So you have this whole mix of feelings where you feel awful for the people there for what they're living in, although it's really strange, Jordan. They're kind of happy, right? Because they don't know anything else.
Yeah.
And I found the children there happier than the kids you see in North America. So it's a completely different side of the world, and it was an incredible experience.
Now we're gonna get into the famous Trade Center a little bit.
All right.
Who comes up with the little skits for the Trade Center?
Well, I will take a blame for a lot of them, Jordan. Most of the dumb ones, that would be my fault. Certainly in the last couple of years. I think a couple of years ago I said I'm kind of out of ideas. So we have some producers who've come up with other things. But every year I wanted to do so. It's such a long day, and it's kind of a silly show, because some of the trades we talk about, if it happened on any other day other than Trade Center, they would barely get mentioned on Sports Center, right? They're so small. But because it's Trade Center, we make a big deal out of them. So I sort of became aware a few years into it how kind of ridiculous the whole concept of doing a 10-hour show was on that day, and decided we better at least have some fun with it. And I don't know, I'm trying to think of what my favorites. There was one year when we had llamas. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yeah.
There'd been a couple of llamas that had escaped from a zoo in Arizona there was a helicopter, live 6:00 news chase that had been on the week before. So we decided to bring these llamas in, and that was just ridiculous. Gino Reda chasing llamas around a parking lot. And I think my other favorite year is we decided to make it like a hockey game. So all the things that you see during TV timeouts and intermissions. So we had that T-shirt cannon that Marty Biron unfortunately hit Jennifer Hedger with, and all sorts of kiss cam and ridiculous things like that. So you got to make it fun, right? To pass the time when there's no trades.
Yeah, you do, definitely.
Yeah.
Can you take me through that? Like, what's it like for the whole day of being a host of a trade center? Like, what do you do?
Well, it's different than most of our normal shows. Like if I was doing a Leafs game or something, Jordan, and I would come in at 3 or 4 o'clock, and we'd have a meeting, and go through what we were going to talk about in the pregame show, and we do the pregame show, and then we do the game and the intermissions. Trade deadline, it's just kind of everything is off the cuff because you don't know who's going to get traded where and what's going to happen. So I just show up, try to be prepared and know what teams want what and what players are up for grabs. And I have a help of a lot of people behind the scenes. There's a guy named Steve Dryden who's the evil quiz master. A lot of people think I'm the evil quiz master, but it's really this guy Steve Dryden. And he gives me a binder thick of notes, and then we just talk all day. So I don't know how else to describe it. I'm fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of guys who know a lot about hockey, the Ray Ferraros and Mike Johnsons and Dave Poulins and Jamie McLennans and guys like that of the world. So it's pretty easy for me. I always describe it to people is just spending the day sitting around talking hockey with a bunch of guys that know a lot about hockey. So that's not a bad gig, is it?
No, that's not. What do you eat on that day?
That's a good question. Because my biggest challenge, Jordan, on that day is when to go pee. Because I am glued to my seat, and the commercial breaks are usually only 1 minute long. And so I basically have to say, all right, we'll be right back after this on Trade Center 2021. And then, boom, dash out to the bathroom, make sure I wash my hands, and get back in a minute. They bring us, I think Harvey sponsored us a couple of years. And so we have a Harvey burger or something like that in the middle of the day, or pizza sometimes comes in. But because you get so long breaks, I'm always talking between bites, so I'm always worried I'm going to have a piece of cheese hanging from my mouth while I'm talking on national TV.
Cool. Who were your influences in the broadcasting world when you were coming up?
It's funny. Probably my biggest influences were not in sports. I often say David Letterman, who was a talk show host for the longest time, and I watched him every night back in his early days in NBC when he was. I think that's when he was at his funniest, and I think I learned to love broadcasting through him. His stupid sense of humor probably led to some of the dumb things that you saw on Trade Deadline. So he was a big influence on me, I think, just the way he conducted interviews and the silliness that they did on the show. As far as sports guys, I always liked Bob Costas on NBC, and Dave Hodge when he was doing Hockey Night in Canada, and a couple of local guys who unfortunately now have passed away, but Brian Smith and Bill Patterson, who anybody outside of Ottawa would not know, but they were the local sportscasters in Ottawa when I broke in, and they taught me an awful lot. So those are the guys that I really looked up to.
You have written 4 books in your career. Was writing a book a hard process?
Yeah, it really is. It's so different from doing television or doing radio or doing podcasting. It's so much more work, first of all. So it takes, 6 months probably, I think, to write a book. Some take longer, I'm sure, if you're writing Lord of the Rings or something. But for me, they take about 6 months, and it's kind of all-consuming where you think about it all the time. And what am I going to write about? And the latest book I wrote, called Beauties, you had to get the interviews with all the players and then transcribe the interviews and then try and write the stories the best way possible. And then you have to go through the editing process. So it's a ton of work, but it's very satisfying. When you do see the book come out and it's right there for you and you're sitting there holding it in your hand. I'm not trying to plug the book, but it just happened to be here.
You can plug.
Yeah, it's okay. But when you have the book and it arrives at your house, and I don't know, it's a really cool feeling because it's like you've created a little piece of art. Now, I'm not pretending that I'm an artist, but you feel like you've created this little thing that's going to be permanent that hopefully people will like. And that's really satisfying because when you do TV, look, I'm not going to sit around 20 years from now and say, boy, remember when Bob McKenzie and I did that great panel hit about the Leafs power play? You never remember that stuff. But a book has a kind of permanence to it where, maybe my grandchildren might read it or something. And I really get a kick out of that, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Now we're going to get into the TSN original series called The Butterfly Boy with Jonathan Petra.
Right.
Can you tell everybody about that?
Yeah, Jordan, I love talking about Jonathan. I was introduced to Jonathan. My sister sent me an article in the Ottawa Citizen about him. And for any of your viewers or listeners who don't know Jonathan's story, he was born with a very rare skin condition called epidermolysis bullosa, which is one of the most painful conditions known to mankind, and there's no cure for it. Basically, your skin is kind of like a butterfly. It's that soft. So you could poke me, we could poke Jonathan in the arm, and he'd have a cut that would last for forever. So his entire body was covered with lesions and cuts, basically from the moment he was born. And even things like your throat, his throat was covered in all these cuts. And so it made it difficult to drink or eat. So he went through incredible pain his entire life. Jonathan, one of his dreams was to be a sportscaster. And so that's how I got to know him when he came down to TSN and came on our panel, and we got to be good friends and got to do some things together. And he became a close friend. He was your ultimate role model because he never complained about anything. And you think of the average person, somebody like me, the little things that we gripe about in life or get down about. And this guy just had the most positive attitude facing the most ridiculous pain you can imagine. So I really I think he changed my life and a lot of people's lives. Unfortunately, he passed away, I guess 3 years ago now. We miss him a lot, but he did so much good in his time, more than most people do in a lifetime. So he had a great life, as tough as it was.
How does he still impact? Does he still have an impact on you today? And how does he?
100%, Jordan. That's a great question. Like I said, whenever I'm complaining about something stupid, whether it be in my life or at work, again, you think about Jonathan, and it gives you instant perspective of what real problems are and real pain is. And I hope that stays with me forever. And I think that's, it's tough for him to have given me the gift that way. I wish that he didn't have to suffer to give people like me perspective. That's a horrible thing. But that's one of the many gifts he gave, I think, is just to show people to find light in the darkest of situations, I think is probably the best way to put it.
Wow, that was a good story. Good job explaining that.
Thank you.
Who's the funny guy on the TSN hockey panel?
The funniest guy?
Yeah.
Well, boy, they all have senses of humor. Like, people don't think Darren Drager's funny because he's serious on TV, but he's really funny. I would say Jeff O'Neill, probably the O-Dog, because he is very self-deprecating, meaning he makes fun of himself a lot, and he tells hilarious stories from his playing days. I don't know if you saw any of the video of his running race. Jeff's probably has a few more pounds on him than he wants to, but he doesn't mind making fun of himself. So he makes me laugh probably as much as anybody else. But Bob McKenzie's funny. Everybody, Dave Poulin, all the guys have their own great sense of humor.
What did you make of the Seattle Kraken expansion draft last night?
Well, I'm still a little confused. We're doing this live, and I know some trades are just coming out today if somebody's watching this later. So I was a little perplexed by some of their choices, frankly, but At the same time, I don't think that anyone should say this is what is Ron Francis thinking? What is he doing? Obviously, he has a plan.
Yeah.
And I think you have to see what he does in free agency and what trades he makes and you have to see the team on the ice before you make any judgment, because Ron Francis is a smart guy who's been around hockey an awful long time. So but I was a little perplexed by some of the choices he made. I do think that in general, Seattle's an amazing city. The uniforms look awesome. I think the Kraken.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, the Kraken's a great name. So I'm glad hockey's coming to Seattle. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
I was surprised at how many D they took at first. I thought they would take forward first, but I guess D's the most important position, as you can tell by the Winnipeg Jets.
I think you're right, Jordan. I think that's the spot where most guys will say you build your team from the back out. They got a couple of pretty good goalies. I think Dreger's a good goalie, and Joey Decord's actually a good goalie from Ottawa. So that didn't surprise me, and some of the better teams were available. So it'll be really interesting to see what they do, though. I still think that they have a lot of money to spend in free agency, but do free agents want to come and be on an expansion team that has kind of a real expansion roster? That'll be the interesting thing, is whether they can draw people. If you're 28 years old and you finally hit free agency and your dreams to win Stanley Cup, do you think Seattle can win that in the next 3 or 4 years? So he's got a good selling job he has to do, Ron Francis.
Yes, he does. Well, thank you for coming on, James. It was fun to meet you virtually and to actually talk to you, not see you on TV or not message you on Instagram.
Well, no, thank you for having me, Jordan, and thanks for all the messages on Instagram. I'm terrible, by the way, at responding to messages, as you know. Sometimes I take forever. Sometimes I forget to check my Instagram for 2 weeks. So thank you for your patience in waiting for me, and I really enjoyed coming on. Congratulations on your show, and I hope you inspire a lot of people with what you do, and I hope you're a super big success. Don't come steal my job. I need a few more years, all right?
I'll try.
5 more years or so, okay?
Maybe in 5.
Okay, buddy.
Maybe.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.